solve this problem, we need to make sure that we need to understand that all the provision interventions are informed by knowledge of the digital exclusion phenomenon and the real needs of the excluded or marginalized. And this is the point that Leela is trying to educate us. And on that note, let me just say a few words about Leela. Right, Leela is Professor Emerita of Digital Inclusion and Participation at Loughborough University. She specializes in the behavioral aspects and human use of information and communications technologies, strategies for social and digital inclusion, citizen engagement and participation. She has worked on and led a wide range of programs in research, in consulting and advisory roles. This has included the New Dynamics of Aging program called SAS-IT, the project to develop understanding of the use of digital technologies by older people. She's also been involved in this EPSRC-funded KT Equal Consortium, established specifically to exploit a decade of investment in aging and disability research. She was also commissioned by DCMS in 2018 to develop the Digital Engagement What Works Toolkit. She was a member of the Ofcom Strategic Advisory Board and a member of the Digital Inclusion Stakeholder Group of the Government Digital Strategy Team and of the WP-led Age Action Alliance Digital Inclusion Group. I can go on, right? But the point is this, yeah, we have a very, very qualified, well-informed, and more importantly, delighted that she's also a founding member of the BCS Digital Divide Specialist Group. And so therefore we have somebody who's very knowledgeable, and we would like her help to help us all understand and navigate through this really complex and a multidimensional challenge. So on that note, Leela, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Freddie. I'm very impressed that so many people are listening this evening, especially if you've spent a lot of the day listening to Jeremy Hunt and suffering the effects of that. So good evening to everybody. What we're doing today is a sequel to the webinar that we gave in October of last year. That one was entitled Enabling Digital Participation for All, and explicitly focused on older people. So it was entitled, What Can We Do to Support Older People? And a lot of the research and quite a few of my slides will mention older people. The reason for this is that the work that I talk about was funded under the New Dynamics of Aging program, a program supported by all the research councils. But many of the issues, before too many of you are turned off, many of the issues are experienced by very many excluded or digitally disadvantaged people. So there's a lot of commonality and a lot of messages that apply for all of them. Next. Next slide. Right. I shall obviously not repeat the content of last time's, the previous webinar, but I will try to very briefly recap what we covered. We looked at the experiences of older people in particular, the nature of exclusion, the numbers, the startling numbers of people who are really don't have access to the internet, or if they do have access, they are not in a position to make a lot of use of that. The numbers remain fairly standard. There's still a lot of people. They talk about between 11 and 13 million people who do not have access to the internet. And clearly what everybody in this room is hoping to do is to bridge that gap, to bring down those numbers. And the motivation for creating the today's talk, putting together a framework for digital participation for all, is really to address the issues and the difficulties that people are facing in the many exciting initiatives that are going on at the moment. So I shall start off with a fairly frivolous reminder of the nature of what we experience as digital users. Next. So for the fortunate few who are digitally sophisticated, who know what they're doing, who are able to manage their lives using technology, have all sorts of apps on their phones, use them for many areas of life. They're enjoying everything. Digital heaven, in other words. Next. We see the widespread benefits of digital participation and inclusion. People having fun, the individuals sharing what's on their screen, looking at exciting stuff, being able to find out information, set up all sorts of plans in projects, sharing information from the internet, able to do our banking, get a quote, socializing, sharing pictures of grandchildren, whatever it might be. And that's part of enjoying what it is to be digitally included. So widespread benefits of digital participation and inclusion. Now, it's all very well if you have the skills and the access to the technology and the ability to use that technology, to use the internet. Next, but for very many people, digital hell is something very grim. If not cybercrime itself, the fear of cybercrime is huge. Worries about how these things are going to affect you, impact you, may you lose all your savings, lose your house, very many things that are publicized a lot about the dangers. Next. And the impact of all of that. A major aspect of digital hell is the sheer stress, frustration, loss of time, time-consuming. These images are very powerful. They're really expressing the grim side of trying to make sense of what's on your screen, how to use it, how to stop it, how to protect yourself, and show the level of fear and anxiety that people often experience using it. So the issue, we clearly see this huge digital divide, those for whom it's enjoyable and there's just the occasional issue and they know how to deal with it, those for whom there's just so much that is negative. Next. So it seems that there is a powerful case for a new approach. How do we need to achieve digital participation of many of the excluded or marginalized in society, and it needs something different. What we concluded from looking at the research and what we discussed last time was the fact that a needs-based solution appears to be a key part of what we attempt to do, what we need to do to bridge the digital divide, one that's embedded in the community. We already have the know-how, for example, all of these things, and the pandemic has given unprecedented impetus to apply this knowledge. All of this was known before the pandemic, but the pandemic brought it home to everybody, including policymakers and many providers, that the people are really suffering, really struggle to make use of the technology, especially when they're on their own. And the challenge for us now is how do we harness all this capability to meet the needs? Next. Well, the challenge of the new approach, a new approach, is huge. There's clearly no silver bullet. And what this means is that contributions will be needed from many stakeholders, including this list. And this conclusion is reflected in the work of the Digital Poverty Alliance, the specialist group of the BCS, all recognizing that there is a need for strategic alliances, partnerships, collaborations of all of the above, all of the listed stakeholders and many others. And they are going to be crucial to success. And there's the ambitious target being set of bridging the digital divide by 2030. Clearly it's going to be tough delivering that. And it means we can't afford to keep repeating the same mistakes, not using the research findings that we have, not use the expertise that we have. And one major tried and tested example of national collaboration was in the success of the A to D switchover of television in the earlier part of this century. showing the power of focused, coordinated collaboration. Now, clearly, we're in different circumstances in many ways, but the things that continue are to show that it's very powerful if all of this effort can be focused and in a coordinated way. Next. If we look at what the analog digital switchover actually looked like, the scale of cooperation was just massive. Not possible to fit everybody who was involved on one slide, but a lot of government departments engaged, broadcasters, major telecom suppliers, and deliverers. On the supply chain, it was quite spectacular what had to be done. They had to stop production of analog television, but accelerate production of set-top boxes. And all of that happened, but it didn't happen by accident. It happened as a result of very enormous clarity about the goals, great clarity about the scale of collaboration that was necessary. Next. The BBC was requested by government to deliver support to those who need it. Now, a big question is, if we would try to apply similar lessons to closing the digital divide, who would you be requesting to deliver support to those who need it? And those are key questions for us to come back to. A critical point is that they had a very robust infrastructure and organization, and they was helped by the fact that the goal was very clear. There was no fudging it, there was no confusion about it. When the plug was pulled on analog television, it was obviously just simply unacceptable to think of people not being able to watch television. And we need similar concern at high levels. Next. So looking at what's happening, the very many exciting endeavors that are going on everywhere, barely a day goes by without there being a conference, a webinar, something where attention is given to innovations that are happening in our communities, and a lot of excitement about them, and potentially they should be helping us to bridge the digital divide. In reality, we haven't made a lot of progress collectively across the board. And some of the things that might help us are listed here. It's very likely that there are other key components that should be here. And I want to stress that this is not in any sense cast in stone. It's in many ways, this draft is a tool for gaining your feedback, indicating other things or different things or qualifications for what's here. So please give us your feedback. Next. I'll go through each of those characteristics, each of those components rather. If we look at the huge ambition of the vision of providing achieving universal connectivity and digital participation for everyone, that needs translating into something that we can all identify with. And one way of representing this is to say that what it will mean is the successful and confident digital participation of every individual in society. So hugely ambitious aims, but that is what we've set ourselves with the various campaigns and efforts that are going on. Next. As part of the vision back in 2010, Tim Berners-Lee saying very clearly, everyone in the world should be given a low bandwidth connection to the net, preferably for free. Earlier than that, the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, regarding taking on the fact that they saw this as providing the greatest opportunity there has ever been for human progress. So a high-level global vision about how we could exploit the internet. Next. Next. Yeah. The next one, a key component that needs to be part of any framework or any agreed structure that enables us to meet the goal is that we need to respect human rights of the individual, use technology to enhance the quality of their experience, the quality of life, and avoid harms, both mental, physical, financial, from such use. And if we look at some of the things that happen in telecare, it is evident that the human rights of the individual are being breached, and we need to be concerned about that. Many areas of society now where we're all subject to digitalization, we're all on the receiving end of it, but there are issues there that there are principles that we're perhaps not addressing in a coordinated way. We need to ensure that stakeholders specify, the stakeholders who are specifying, designing and providing solutions have real awareness and understanding and knowledge of the phenomenon of digital exclusion, especially understanding user needs. And that does not always appear to be the case. We need to apply the user-centered inclusive design principles, which have been developed over the last 30 years, probably. The human factors community have put vast efforts into this, and they are now part of the curriculum of many computer courses across the country. And the BCS has led in that inclusion of these principles in the training of people coming into the profession. But we still see many examples where they're not being applied, and we need to regard this as a fundamental principle. The content needs to be relevant to user needs. It sounds blindingly obvious, but again, it doesn't always happen. And we need to engage users in scoping, design, and delivery of the technology that they're going to be using subsequently. Next. On the policy front, we need two things. One is to formulate new policy to fill gaps where it doesn't exist, and the other is to modify or tweak existing policies. Two major areas where we need policy currently is to ensure that provision is matched to identified needs of digitally disadvantaged or excluded. It should not be enough that somebody wakes up one morning and thinks of a widget that's going to solve the problems of digital exclusion. There needs to be a process behind saying, well, what needs is this going to meet, and can we be sure about this? We need to fundamentally to differentiate clearly between the nature of the training requirements of the employment sector for digitally skilled staff. This is the stuff that is the focus of the UK digital strategy, and differentiate that from the learning support needs of many of the 11 to 13 million who are not seeking employment, nor required to do so. But there is also a major area of overlap where there are individuals in the workplace in their 50s who are being required to use digital technologies which baffle them, confuse them, scare them, and we're not doing nearly enough about looking after that. I'll come back to that if it's of interest to people. Next. There also needs to be a better use of or tweaking of existing policies. For example, government are the most massive customer you can think of. They buy stuff across the country, for schools, hospitals, prisons, you name it. They are paying the bill for IT systems, services, devices. And they could use those procurement policies as really powerful drivers of digital inclusion and participation. Mentioning a moment ago, the fact that we have excellent guidelines for user-centered design, inclusive design criteria, many, many things that are available now in our hospitals, etc., do not meet those, are not designed with those criteria in mind. And government have a wonderfully powerful way to mandate that. We also need funders to review their eligibility criteria. Too often we see that that it's only the corporate organizations and charities and so on who are eligible to apply for funds. So we've seen a very recent call for applications for funding that sounded really attractive and a great way of helping digital inclusion, but then a requirement to even apply is that you had the organization had a minimum of 25K per year income right up to 500K. Now, those sums are just, those kinds of figures are just not something that many grassroots groups could identify with for a moment, and certainly would not meet the criteria. So we are deliberately excluding tiny organizations who have the often described as unincorporated groups, and they will be grateful for £500 worth of funding across the year, never mind 25K a year. So we need to look at that, use the data that all of you would be can access to show that this is not an effective way of operating. Next. Strategy. Now, we could have dozens of them here, but this is a simple one of what a successful strategy in an urban setting might look like. And the aim would be to achieve digital participation of everyone in a community, but it will, of course, need to reflect urban or rural. In an urban setting, the way it might look is that in every community, digital learning in familiar, informal, welcoming environments in publicly funded or other buildings that don't have to charge to participants. Use of familiar local venues is powerful. The reason for wanting to do this is that it enables learning to be in socially embedded and accessible environments. It's not requiring people to go back to school, to sign into college, etc., and therefore relaxed and enjoyable. What they're providing is a readily available and compassionate support to use digital capabilities. The issue of stewardship is an interesting one. Under the stewardship of entities in the community, such as, and local councils ought to be in there, or parish councils, or whatever, public libraries, professional bodies, faith groups, schools. This is where it would be great to have examples from you of who else should be listed, who is trusted in the community and could be the funding stakeholders, if you like, for the tiny organizations. Who's going to be involved? It's a wide range of users. It should be anybody who is seeking help with digital skills and using technology. I shouldn't have said skills. It's developing the confidence to be able to use the devices they have, starting with their smartphones maybe. When it needs to be available on a regular basis as appropriate and affordable, but it needs to be reliable and sustained. Next. The practices that we introduce and apply need to promote sustainability, i.e. phase out the short-termism that we see everywhere. Manage expectations of users, of people who come to learn these things carefully. Be aware of potential damaging practices that we introduce all the time. We use jargon that's entirely meaningful to us. You need to remind yourself that we might know what we mean when we talk about different digital platforms. To many people in the 13 million excluded, a platform is what you stand on waiting for a train. Issues of fixed appointments, form filling, performance assessments, paperwork of many kinds is a real turn-off to many of the people we're trying to reach. So we could easily avoid, with no cost, well, very low cost, we could avoid actively setting up these known barriers to inclusion. And we need to engage participants in deciding on details, such as vocabulary and working out practical arrangements for what works for them. Next. On to design. Now, we could spend the entire evening on this topic. Loads of human factors work has gone on in this area. And we can reduce the cognitive load that many older people, people with learning disabilities experience trying to battle with our current technologies. And they can be reduced by designs which have been carefully tailored, designed for diverse user requirements, that are user-friendly, in other words, meeting the criteria, the principles that we know about, accessible, intuitive, seamless, embedded where appropriate, adaptive, and where you can make upgrading and admin transparent and easy. Next. Design is an area I've already mentioned where potentially government procurement policy is such a powerful way of achieving this. They could require, they could make it, they could mandate the need that digital technology and products and systems do all of these things. I've already mentioned this, I won't spend more time on it, except to say that what it would do is achieve a better match between user needs and digital products and services, and therefore be a major help in increasing adoption and uptake, therefore reducing the digital divide. Next. So resources, on-off funding model is simply not fit for purpose, but we have it everywhere. We introduce new exciting things. We put huge effort into attracting people to come and experience them. The users begin to trust you. They begin to use what's available. They get excited about it, even begin to rely on it. And then the plug is pulled on funding. I'm sure all of you have incredible examples, but very many rather depressing examples of this happening. So we need to move to funding universal access. Well, who pays? We need to think that through and recognize that very many of the beneficiaries, the massive global beneficiaries of digitalization, could also help to fund it, to fund the support side that makes it accessible to people. We need to develop a shared knowledge base so that much of the learning that's going on all the time in the many things that many of you in this audience are involved with, that the learnings are shared. And Freddie may want to say something at the end about joining the dots where efforts are being made for the technology companies to be working together. Next. One thing we wanted to do was to very briefly show the scale of the learning barriers, the entry barriers. This is one lady in her 50s trying to explain her perception of, you'll see it's an old computer, and her complaints and the complaints that we hear time and time and time again. There's no one to help me if it all goes wrong. You know, fine, you've learned something, you can do the basics, but then you're not able to remedy it. My grandchildren try to help, but they're too fast. I don't know where to get information. I don't know where to get help. I learn what to do in class and I feel I've got it there, but then I go home, either I've forgotten it all or my device is different. It doesn't have the same controls. It doesn't look the same. Insufficient provision of learning. There's not really somewhere you can go to get help. Fears about breaking it, scared of the mouse, cost of training and technology, learning by trial and error. This comment says frustrates me. It also worries people because they're afraid of doing the wrong thing. I don't understand the technical language the trainers use. So a whole host of entry barriers faced by people trying to get on board with this. Next. Similar thing, but for someone who has got to grips with it, with the technology, but same point, it's all gone wrong. I don't know how to put it right. I did it a while ago. Now I don't know how to do it. My mind's gone blank. Huge memory problems for very many people. My support network has gone. That usually means a grandchild has gone off to university, and so it's like your IT department disappearing. Complaints about the technology changing. I used to know how to do things, now everything's different. And the issues to do with update, drivers, all the things that mean you think you've got a grip on things and suddenly everything changes. Next. So some of the common myths that we need to challenge if we're to understand needs better. These common myths are everywhere. The only one I'll have time to deal with is the older people are not motivated to use digital technology. Next. We asked people to challenge that myth. One of the questions that we asked people was, how would you feel if you had to give up using the computer? So there's people who have bitten the bullet, they are using it, probably is what Ofcom would define as a narrow user, but they're using it. And these are very strong words if you take a minute to look at them. Words like powerless, dismayed, regretful, rejected, horrible, mortified even. So people are very committed to what they put a lot of effort, very tough learning curve for many of them. So they're certainly not lacking tenacity and commitment.